It's 11:05 a.m. on September 9th, meeting of the Whatcom County Forest Resilience Task Force. Looks like our first item of business is to establish quorum. Melanie or Kate, are you all able to determine whether or not we have hit our quorum status?
Yeah, Chris, it looks like we have 11. Do you have anyone else in the room with you?
Not task force members, no.
Okay. So that's 11, and that is,
We are at a quorum.
yeah, we have established our quorum.
All right, well, thanks Melanie, and thanks Melanie and Kate for getting the agenda and pack it out. Just before we get into it, has folks had a chance to review the agenda? And are there any proposed modifications as written? All right, hearing none, I'll move on to our August 12th meeting summary. Hopefully folks had a chance to review. Are there any edits or suggested changes to the meeting summary as written? All right, hearing none, we'll just keep on rolling. The next bullet we have here, updates and announcements. I am joined by Tracy Petrosky in the room. I think the one, go ahead, Barry, if you got something.
Yeah, it's just something, I'm not sure when to bring it up. It's, if we have an urgent, relevant issue, where on the agenda would we bring, is that announcements? Or where would we raise that question?
I think for, yeah, if task force members have anything significant they'd like to bring forward, I think we're gonna hold this updates announcements bullet in kind of our opening agenda item. So this is probably the best space to do that. So if you've got something, go ahead.
Yeah, and it just came to my attention that there's two DNR sales. I think one on Lake Walk, Lilla Lily, and what's the other one called? Shoot, I forgot the name of the other one. Anyway, but they're in essentially old, mature timber areas. And you know, that's exactly what the kind of thing we'd be addressing. But if I'd like to see us actually just request the council just to have DNR put a hold on those until this process can be finished this year anyway, because you know, these things are happening in like in the Lake Whatcom watershed and places that are could be very ecologically important. And these two in particular, I guess, have raised a lot of public comment, like 1,000 letters and that sort of thing. So, you know, so if we, you know, if we go through our process and they've already been logged, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. So it seems to me that something like this should be raised to a kind of an urgent level of hold on a minute until we can get our process to address some of these things.
Okay. Well, I might, that's a great comment, Barry. Thanks for bringing that up. I might just propose modifying our agenda slightly and actually bring this back up at the end of the meeting. So I might add that under wrap up and next steps, just to determine whether or not the task force would like to take any action as you propose. So if it's all right, I guess, are there any objections from the task force if we pick this right up before we adjourn? Just because it seems like a big topic and I don't want to derail the rest of our action items today. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah, that sounds good to me, Chris. And we'll just call it urgent matters or something like that, just as a tag.
Yeah.
Or new business.
New business. Yeah, well, it's a good flag, if nothing else, for us to consider how we frame up future agendas to make sure we hold space for items like that. Frank, you got something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make clear too that this process is not only uh, uh, is important for Lummi and Nooksack, but it's also 7 other tribes that utilize these areas up in this region. To the point how they're treaty tribes, and I just want to make sure that it's recognized that it's not just 2 tribes, but there's 9 tribes that's affected by the outcomes of this process.
Thanks, Frank. I might follow up with you and George and Trevor and just try to think through as we start developing materials, if you all have any guidance on how we can make sure we get that full tribal review moving forward.
At any point have we considered contacting Northwest Indian Fish Commission? I mean, that would be the easiest way to get through to the other tribes.
Okay. Good suggestion. Yeah, I'll make sure Melanie and Kate that we probably reach out to them early and consider how we follow up with them throughout the process.
Yeah, absolutely. George, would you or George or Frank on the call, would you be willing to, if we follow up with you, would you be willing to make a connection between us and so that we can make sure we're talking to the right folks?
Definitely, I could do that.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other updates or comments from task force members?
I
Go ahead,
just,
Ellen.
yeah, I would just like to make a comment. Could we get like bios from the task force members? There are times I want to ask a question or direct a question to somebody with a certain expertise, and I'm sorry that first meeting introductions, I didn't catch everyone's background necessarily. Just, that's my thought. Anyway.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, I don't know if that's something we can glean from folks' application or whether we want to request folks to write up their own bio, but that seems reasonable. Maybe I'll follow up with Melanie and Kate and try to brainstorm what the best approach could be.
Yeah, I think maybe summarized version of application materials, something like that sounds good, Chris. We can talk more about that.
I think the only other update or announcement that I had, I know, or I believe Kate had interviewed Tom Westergreen, who's a local forester, and he'd offered to host a field tour out at his site and invite task force members out. So I think, the question was whether or not there was interest from task force members in trying to convene an in-person field tour at some point. I guess the other question, if we were inclined, at what point in our planning process would be most appropriate to organize that field trip? Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. I think when is a good question that I think we can address. But I think I know from our subcommittee on forest management coordination, small private landowners was one of the groups that we wanted to bring the voice into that group into the work of our subcommittee, at least. And I think it was probably broader to some of the other subcommittees. So I would look forward to that. I've toured Tom's place several times, and I think it would be very interesting for all the rest of us.
Kyle, you got your hand raised? Maybe I'll back up briefly. Russ, if I understood, I guess, was there a proposal in there, or are you thinking there's a good time where we should bring up discussion of a field tour?
I I don't have a time yet. I think for our own committee's work, we're hoping to develop a set of questions for forest landowners, which we're going to lean on some expertise of people in the field to develop those questions. So for us, it would be useful if we could at least get a pretty good idea of the questions first. So that's going to take us one or two more meetings of our subcommittee before we get to that point, I believe.
Great.
But we can fit in with whatever else other people feel like, because I think we'll be flexible that way.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think my thought was to hopefully get a little bit deeper into our planning process and maybe arrange a early winter, late winter type field visit, but they will bring that back up at our next meeting or two to try to lock in a preferred timeline. Well, I think that was it with updates or announcements, unless anyone else has anything. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, I'm gonna move us along to our next agenda item, which is discuss meeting format.
Sorry, Chris, looks like Russ has one more thing.
Go ahead, Russ.
I joined a little bit late, and is there a place for updates from subcommittees?
That's a good question. Unless they're, I'm just looking at the agenda. You know, we have our confirmed definition of forest resilience. I guess,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, I was just, so, the subcommittee meetings got scheduled before or after this agenda went out, so it's great that you all had a chance to meet, and we weren't thinking that, all of the subcommittees, we weren't sure if the subcommittees would have a chance to meet before this meeting, so I think as time allows during that discussion of forest resilience, since it seems like that was discussed at subcommittee meetings, perhaps that would be a place where we could hear from subcommittees related to that discussion. How does that sound? Chris, I'll ask you first, since just because I wasn't in the subcommittee meetings, and then Russ, if that fits the bill.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought. If
Okay.
you are plan outline, talk through forest resilience, I think that is probably a good spot to do a little subcommittee debrief.
Does that sound okay, Russ?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I prepared a report from our subcommittee, which I emailed to Kate. So with the idea that if that looks good, we could distribute it to all the members. I don't know if we're gonna put together like a forest resilience task force library or something,
Mhm.
but somehow get that as one of our documents. And I figured we'd do that for each subcommittee meeting so that we can, and basically I want to touch bases with the rest of the members and see if it seems like we're on the right track.
Mhm.
Randy, go ahead.
This is unrelated to what Russ was just saying. So if Steve, if you're going to follow on to what Russ said, why don't you go before me?
Oh, thanks, Brandy. I think one of the things that came up both in the management coordination subcommittee that Brandy and Russ and others are on, and in the climate informed management committee that Brandy and Oliver and others are on, is that we were going to ask Melanie and Kate if there is a way to share files with the committee, if Triangle could set up some kind of a file sharing place, or otherwise maybe we should just, as each subcommittee, we could just set up a Google Drive on our own. Anyway, that's a question I think for Triangle people that came up in both subcommittees.
Yeah, great question. The short answer is yes, I think there's a way that we can do this, and We'll talk about it more at the 11:30 portion of our agenda. And the main thing, and Kirsten can help with this too, is we just need to be sure that we're abiding by the Open Public Meetings Act with all shared documents. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I think there are ways that we can do that and still meet those requirements.
Go ahead, Brandy.
Thanks. Apologize, I was late, and my question is, if I can use this time to just put forward a couple of things that I was going to say at the beginning before the agenda got adopted. I don't know if it's appropriate, so I put that. Is it appropriate for me to take us back to something I was going to say about the agenda?
Go for it.
Thanks. So I just wanted to share that there's a correction to the minutes from the last meeting that I can share in the chat. It's not substantive, and then I just wanted to make sure that when we get to the discussion about the plan outline, that we bring back the conversation about the rules, the guidelines, the guidance and procedures document, and the section of that document that refers to the plan development. That's what I wanted to share as sort of friendly agenda amendments. In the minutes, really just that there's just a couple of corrections about where I'm noted having said something. Just wanted to get them corrected. Okay.
For your second item, Brandy, are you okay just bringing that up when we get to the plan outline discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering too, I don't know if I missed it to the various emails transmitted since joining this task force, but I was just wondering what the Whatcom County's perspective is on the definition of a resilience forest is.
Well, I think that's something we're gonna get into. You know, we have some guidance in the ordinance and the code that was adopted by county council. It's a good starting point. But I think the task force ideally has the ability to work on having a definition that we all can agree on, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. All right. Well, I'm gonna carry us on to our second agenda item now. Melanie, I see you're off mute. Do you wanna tackle this one?
Yeah, so Chris is in the garden room, which is an in-person meeting space that is now reserved for these meetings moving forward. I believe, Chris, you've reserved them for this meeting time indefinitely, our Monday meeting slot.
This is gonna be our normal meeting room, but sometimes we have other county conflicts, so just double check the agenda to make sure. It'll certainly be downtown somewhere near the Civic Center, near the garden room, but just double check the agenda.
Okay, perfect. So this came from a request we got to talk more about in-person meetings and ways that might be feasible. I wanted to just ask folks if this feels like a good solution is to have the option to join in person, but not require folks to join in person. And if Chris is committed to having an in-person meeting spot for those that would like to join in person, does that sound okay for folks? And if anyone has any other suggestions or questions about that, we have a few minutes, we can discuss it.
Go for it, Tracy.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I'm actually in the garden room. This is Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
I would like to pipe an opinion in on this, is that while I love the convenience of either hybrid or remote meetings, I feel like this task force, it's really, really important for us to get to know each other and be in the same room as much as possible. It was certainly not convenient for me to drive in from, rural Whatcom County to come in today, but I do think that this is an important thing. The other thing I would like to propose is that instead of having it at 11 o'clock, if we looked at a different hour of the day, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, for instance, 4 to 5:30 or 4 to 6. And the reason for that is I have noticed as a member of the Forest Advisory Committee that at first we had hybrid meetings and then we started doing in person, and it has completely changed the efficacy of our group to be in person. And what happens is that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we get together, at 6 o'clock, those meetings end, and we are always getting kicked out of the building and thrown into the parking lot for conversations for another hour, because we have differences of opinion, we have similarities, we have things we want to work on. And a lot of that passion comes from the fact that we are in person together. And I think having it at 11 o'clock in the middle of the day makes it really difficult to feel like after we're done with those conversations that we want time to sit and go, I want to go to a coffee shop, or I want to go to a bar, I want to hang in the parking lot and talk to people more passionately about this. And I'll quit here with just saying, I think we all joined this task force because we feel really strongly about the things that we want to see happen in Whatcom County. And the only way to really get to know each other is in person and having it later in the day, so we have capacity to share and debrief and talk about things later. So anyway, that's my long, more than 2 cents.
Thanks, Tracy. If I could just one thing before we turn it, well, actually, sorry, no, I'll wait till the end. Go ahead, other folks. Ellen, I think I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I would like to also reiterate what Tracy just said. And I do think in person can be a lot more productive in getting to know people, and another time of the day is fine. I think we have to continue with an option of hybrid, because some of us will be on travel at times, some of us will just not be able to make it to the meeting, or there could be health reasons too, that people prefer Zoom. But it would be great if a bulk of people could meet in person. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, we'll maintain the remote login option regardless of where this conversation goes. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I also agree that hybrid is a good idea. I think complicated conversations are great to carry on in person. Later in the day is fine with me also. And I think retaining the Zoom option is very important for continuity. I'm oftentimes in other parts of the country. I've successfully chaired school board meetings from the East Coast or from Spain, and I know you can make it work quite well. So I want to be able to do both, actually.
Good. Brandy? You're on mute, Brandy.
Thank you. I am willing to do whatever the group wants. My preference is that we think about hybrid with periodic in-person meetings so that we actually get full attendance at an in-person meeting. I just don't think it's reasonable in this day and age of hybrid work to expect everybody to show up for an in-person meeting every time. So maybe we could think about every other meeting being in person or every third meeting being in person. I just put that out there as an alternative. I'm definitely interested in, if we're going to continue to meet on the first Monday, I have a conflict with this time frame. I was late because of that conflict. I have a standing commitment with another committee. So I'm definitely open to changing the time of day to meet everybody's needs. And I think that just my final comment is that I assume that this task force, being a task force of Whatcom County, has to follow Open Public Meeting Act requirements, which means that you do need to have a physical space where people can show up to participate in the meeting. So thanks, Chris, for staffing one on a regular basis. And then lastly, I just would ask that when we are in hybrid format, that anyone that's on the subcommittee, or sorry, the task force, just that our video is on so that we can make sure that we're all seeing each other and putting faces and names and voices and thoughts together visually.
Randy. Okay, we got the comment from Dave,
Yeah.
Dave in chat as well, kind of confirming in-person meetings, and yeah, afternoon sounds like another good option. Same thing from Abe as well. Okay, George, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. We do like the hybrid, you know, the option to attend via Zoom. This task force, you know, I mean, I know like Uncle Frank and Trevor and myself, we're forever repeating ourselves when it comes to, you know, well, from NUCSAC for cultural resources, participation in this, for our natural resources and everything. So we're repeating ourselves to every task force, every group that we belong to. And it's just like, you know, right now I'm able to jump on this meeting and we have wildlife meetings signed at the same time. So we're, you know, like immediately after this one, we have to jump onto another meeting that we'll be late for. And you know, I mean, I know everyone else's schedule is the same, but these meetings come up and we're, you know, we're tasked with the whole protecting our treaty rights and our resources. So through evolution, and because of COVID, Zoom has made everything much more easier. We'll be able to participate in meetings that typically we wouldn't be able to have, you know, be able to in the past, if that makes sense.
Yep, sounds good, George. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you all. You know, George, you bring up the really important point, and others chimed in too, of the, you know, accessibility. It's really hard when folks are located in other places or just factoring in that travel time when you're back to back. So I think, you know, we've established that having the option to join virtually is really important, and that will remain. And then Tracy, completely hear you about the value of in-person work. I personally, you know, love being back in person whenever it makes sense. So I think having the option sounds like the way to go. I just want to say, you know, in terms of the scheduling and the time of day for these meetings, we're a pretty big group and everyone is really, really busy and has a lot of demands. And we really tried our best to find a time that works for most of you. And we have a majority of folks in the room today. I think everybody's here actually. So that's pretty incredible. And I would really ask that, because of the time spent scheduling and all of the considerations that went into that time, that we not change the time for these meetings at least through the end of this year. We could revisit it in 2025 when things may have shifted and other possibilities are available. But just in the interest of sticking to the dates and times that we've sent out, you know, a lot of polls to try to make sure that they'll work. I'd ask that we stick to that through the end of this year at least. And then the third suggestion or idea is, you know, these subcommittees could be a really great opportunity to work with the schedules of a smaller group of people and maybe meet in person and take advantage of that smaller group environment to really bounce ideas and get into deeper conversations. So that's an idea for subcommittees to explore further.
Okay.
Any thoughts or reactions? Questions,
Yeah,
comments?
I agree, with what's being said. You know, I personally, speaking on behalf of myself, this time frame for this meeting works perfect for me. You know, like my nephew Georgie was saying, you know, we've been in discussions with both the state and the Forest Service on some of the similar um, issues that we're discussing here. And those meetings, you know, they just for an example, you know, in the last year we've had over 50 meetings with the state alone. And we just started up conversations with the Forest Service. And so that's going to be an additional meetings that we'll be participating in. And those meetings usually run in the afternoon. They last anywhere between 3 to 6 hours, particularly with the state, you know, this upcoming call is, on the 16th, for example, is, starts at 9 and gets over at 3:30. So, this, talk about, moving the meeting dates back to the afternoon at 1 and 4, it just won't be compatible for myself anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for sharing that. Chris, are we okay to move on to the next agenda item?
We've got to.
All right.
Just moving forward, we'll keep the hybrid format. I'll keep holding the physical space and yeah, encourage people to attend in person if they would like, or if it works. And then stick with this meeting time through 2024, and then maybe we'll revisit schedules for 25. Yeah, with that, let's go ahead and keep moving along. And I think we'll pass over to Dave
Yeah.
for high level plan outline.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I want to introduce, or ask rather, Dave Peterson to introduce himself. Dave is on part of Triangle's consultant team and will be working to help us really put pen to paper and work on drafting the plan. So I'd like, Dave, if you could introduce yourself, just a little background on your background and expertise. And then I want to use this as an opportunity to respond to a lot of inquiries from task force members to talk more about, you know, what the actual drafting of this plan will look like. And so we'll get into that a little bit as well. So go ahead, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Melanie, and good morning, everyone. Nice to see a couple of familiar faces and names at the meeting this morning. I'm Dave Peterson. I'm a professor of forest biology at the University of Washington Forestry School. I'm also an emeritus senior scientist with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. I spent most of my career doing research on fire science, climate change science, subalpine forest ecosystems, among other things, and always have an eye on management applications of scientific information. For the last 15 years or so, I've worked pretty intensely on doing climate change vulnerability assessments for national forests in the Western US. We have worked throughout the Western US, and all of those projects involved typically 30 or more stakeholders for every national forest or group of national forests that we work with. Also work quite a bit with national park units and tribes and other stakeholders throughout all of those efforts. Continue to do that today as I'm affiliated with the Northwest USDA Northwest Climate Hub as well. So our goal is to cover the West, if you will, in terms of reaching federal lands. I also, as one of my volunteer focus areas has been on small forest landowners. I am a tree farmer myself in southern Skagit County, very passionate about that. Sometimes I call that my real job. And we all know it takes a lot of work. So I have done an awful lot of volunteer work with small forest landowner community, local forestry organizations, WSU Extension, conservation organizations, land trusts, Anacortes Community Forest Lands. So whoever is interested in looking at forest management, forest stewardship, sustainability, resilience, this is mostly what I've worked on for the last 15 years. So I look forward to perhaps being able to provide some of that expertise to this particular effort. As a resident of Skagit County, I'm kind of envious of you all in Whatcom because I think you're way ahead of us. So maybe I can learn a few things that I can take back here.
Thank you, Dave. So what I'd love to do is share a draft outline for this plan. And what I want everyone to, the purpose of this is just to start thinking about what the components of the plan will look like. And I want to frame this, by sharing that just some of the kind of, I'll call them limitations that we're working within as we as we think about building out this plan over the next year. And one of the limitations is that we have a year to work on this and to get this plan over the finish line, which isn't a tremendous amount of time and requires that we move pretty quickly through this. And the other is, just from our side, from Triangle side and our team side, is we're working within a specific budget to get things done and to keep things moving and on track. And then the third is, we talked about this earlier, is the Open Public Meetings Act and the requirements around sharing documents as stipulated in that. So what that kind of all boils down to is that we can't have one shared document that everyone on the task force has access to. And so we've structured this work in these subcommittees so that we are working on segments at a time that really align with your specific expertise, you, the task force members, so that you can lean into the work that you're really interested in and that you feel really, passionate about and really want to share your expertise. So rather than, every task force member being in the nitty-gritty of each aspect and element of the plan, the subcommittees are designed to have you, really leaning into specific focus areas. And so when we share this outline, I think it would be a good opportunity to start thinking about you as individuals and with your subcommittees, the different areas that you would start to lean into. And I also just, I want to also say that doesn't mean that, we don't want and welcome input on all aspects of this. This is designed to be a very collaborative process. And we recognize that you all have a lot of really great insight and expertise to contribute to this. It's just, I think, important to ground us in the reality of being a pretty large group and working on a limited timeline to get things over the finish line. So I wanted to frame that. And then, Dave, would it be okay if we just spend, 5 minutes just showing the key components of this outline, and I'll share my screen. All right. And I'll start with just sharing the table of contents. Is everyone seeing that okay?
Yep.
All right.
So as Melanie suggested, this is a place to start. And of course, this is very highest level here, table of contents. We try to make this as inclusive and comprehensive as possible. And as we go through this in greater detail, don't think of it so much as a specific roadmap of how to get from, point A to point B, but rather a way for us to organize ideas and concepts, and that this is very much of a dynamic document that will probably evolve as we go along. Okay, we'll just hit the high points here, but I do think the background is an important section. We want to really make sure we have the rationale clear on this. We do want to make sure that the methods and conceptual framework are agreeable to everyone. And so I think, there's nothing really surprising in here in terms of methodology. We do have somewhat of a limited scope on this plan. I think we want it to maybe be around 20 pages, but probably not 5 pages, probably not 100 pages, somewhere in that middle ground where we cover the necessary information, but we don't want to overwhelm members of the public who would also find this interesting and useful in the future. But we'll deal with that as we go along. I guess you could probably scroll down. There we go. So first thing there is the definition of resilience. And I think, Melanie, you're going to cover this.
Yeah, we'll talk about this next.
Okay, good. Overall descriptions, and these goals and objectives come from some of the chartering documentation that we already have for this forest resilience effort. And I also want to mention that, some of you and others in the Whatcom community have already developed some very important documents with respect to forest systems, with respect to climate change. Some of the sections of the comprehensive plan are really excellent. And so those will provide a foundation for what we do here. It's not like we have to reinvent a whole bunch of stuff or start from scratch, because there's a great foundation available here. But you can just scroll through there. You can see the things we're going to talk about here. Now, as I just mentioned, we have these foundational documents, and they provide a very important context, especially including county plans and policies and so forth. We want to make sure that we coordinate and don't contradict as we move forward. Collaboration, very important that everyone has a chance to provide input here, and that we also want to honor the values of the various communities who have interest in the forest resilience issue.
Thank you, Dave. And I'll just, related to the community values piece, this is part of what Triangle is really leading and is responsible for, is going outside of this task force to collect input and feedback. And we mentioned that we've been doing that through assessment interviews, and many of you gave us suggestions for folks to contact, and we've just about wrapped up those, and we'll be summarizing our findings from there and moving forward with a broader engagement framework to go out to the broader public to collect input that will influence this plan. I see Jim. Hang on, let me stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I just have one, I see one shortcoming in this roadmap, and it talked about maintaining our forest footprint, whereas I think given the urgency of the challenges, we should shoot to expand our forest footprint.
You're on mute, Melanie.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jim, for that comment. We have right now, just a little, we call it the parking lot area at the bottom of this document, where we're capturing ideas that that you all are sharing and that we have internally as we're discussing this, and to be input into this document as we move it forward. So I've noted that.
Just a process question, Melanie. When are you all hoping to share that draft outline, or how do you want to receive feedback or input on that moving forward?
Yeah, I was hoping that this could be part of the discussion at the next subcommittee meetings. Like I mentioned, this would be an opportunity for the subcommittees to think about how and where you really want to lean into this. And so if the agenda allows at next subcommittee meetings, I'm hoping that we could share this for each group to review and discuss as a subcommittee.
And I think the only question or comment, just trying to think through subcommittee workload.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the subcommittees have still been trying to kind of nail down our purpose, and we haven't even really jumped into the goal discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just making sure that as we keep stacking up the dominoes for the subcommittees to knock down, that we're what's appropriate to put on a subcommittee meeting, what can we do more remote kind of
Sure.
So I don't have an answer, just something to think through.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, maybe we can revisit after the forest resilience definition and we hear a little bit more from subcommittees, so that I can get caught up on the discussions that have already been had. Brandy, I know that you wanted to make sure we came back to the rules and procedures. So I want to make sure we have time for that, and maybe that's your hand, and maybe you have another comment.
Well, I just want to know if you're inviting general discussion at this point, or if there's something more you were going to do for this agenda item before you open it up for general discussion.
Well, I would love to, I know you specifically asked for discussion around rules and procedures, so maybe we can tackle that. Or would you like to discuss this further before we go into that, specific request that you had about the rules and procedures related to the process?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for you guys to be finished with what you intended to cover before I start bringing my comments to the table. I have several things that I want to share with you in addition to the discussion about rules and procedures.
You go ahead, Brandy.
Okay, so as a rule, I would appreciate it if we would get some content like this in our agenda packet before the meeting. It's really hard to participate in this conversation, seeing what you're showing on screen for the first time. I know of no public meetings public meeting act conflict with giving us the materials ahead of time to look at so that we can come to the conversation informed. Even if you have a very drafty draft document, it's totally fine. Just put drafty draft on it and we'll know that this is like a real, open-ended, iterative conversation that we're participating in. I do want to go back to some of the stuff that you said on the front end of this conversation around plan development. In general, I think a siloed approach is not going to help us get to the end product that we want. And so while I understand that you're hoping to facilitate a process where work is parsed and subcommittees are doing heavy lifting on segments of work, I think in order for the individual assignments to be successful, we need to understand the whole context. So again, more information is better. Metering out information in a more constructive way would be helpful. And seeing all of the goal statements that we're all agreeing to in one place, instead of just seeing them spread across, 4 subcommittee worksheets, this plan document, seeing it all at once, being able to weigh in on the front end about the outline, et cetera, is going to be preferable to me. And I assume I am speaking for other people, even if they aren't going to speak up and say this based on what I heard of the subcommittees. So it's hard to weigh in on this right now. It's fine to just get a general introduction, but not having had it to read ahead of time, it's really hard for me to come to you and say, I think something's missing in the outline. I think that the way that you're organizing some content is not going to be as effective. Like that kind of discussion is what I'm anticipating that we are going to be able to have around this content. And this is where I'm starting to bleed into the discussion about guidelines. I don't need this necessarily in the guidelines, but I do think it needs to be clear who's writing this plan. Are we just here to rubber stamp something that Triangle is writing? Are we actually writing the plan? Are you facilitating us writing a plan with you? Like, I think those sorts of statements is what I'm looking for, and having the guidelines articulated in a way where it makes it clear so that we really understand our roles and our responsibilities and we can engage effectively with you.
Thanks, Brand. Oh,
you know that I have been involved in several projects like this already, so I think this group is perfectly capable of making this lift. I just think that there's a need for some additional clarity. I see the conversations, people struggling with the same thing that I'm trying to articulate here. So to reiterate, sharing more information on the front end and the agenda packets will be helpful. Structuring the conversations in a way where all the material is available to everyone so that everyone can be as informed as possible when they're making the lists on whatever their assignments are. That's going to be important.
thank you, Brandy. I really appreciate all of that feedback. To be more clear about the goal of this agenda item specifically, anytime we want you to review something and provide feedback during the full meeting, we absolutely will share that document in advance. This was to talk about process, and this was just a way to kind of show the way that, how this ties into the subcommittee work. As Chris and I were discussing the next steps for providing feedback on that outline, our thinking was that would not be happening here. That's happening in subcommittees or potentially just, you know, what we're calling homework outside of this meeting time. So I totally hear you. We'll be very clear about when we would like specific feedback on any written documents and share them very drafty draft and attach them to the meeting packet well in advance. I completely understand the desire for full, you know, adequate review time and transparency there. So completely hear and appreciate that request. And in terms of, you know, you said you didn't need the specifics of that in the rules and procedures, but is there anything else you'd like to discuss on the rules and procedure sides of things before
Well, I think right
before I
now,
see if anyone else has comment?
yeah, I think what's confusing for many of us is that we don't understand our specific role in the writing of the plan. And the way that you guys are engaging with us so far, it's hard for us to really suss that out. It feels like, my words, it feels like you are controlling the writing of the plan and you're just mining us for specific pieces of information. If that is the stated purpose, if that is your contract, if that is what Whatcom County wanted you to do, we need to understand that. I'm coming to this process anticipating that I'm rolling up my shirt sleeves and I'm helping you guys and this whole team pull this together and write these recommendations for the council to consider. I think it needs to be stated very clearly in the rules and the procedures, because it's very unclear right now based on the way we've come together and the way the communication is flowing right now. I think it's just going to make it a lot easier for us to dial in if we can come up with some clear statements. And if they don't need to be in the rules and the guidelines, fine, but they need to be stated somewhere.
Totally hear you, Brandy. Jen, did you have a comment on this before I speak again?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of similarity, but from the perspective of I haven't attended the last two meetings, so it's just what information I've been reading. And I think there's some key points also around clarity that are really missing for me. Like the draft goals, I see those. I'm a little unclear who drafted those goals, if that was kind of subcommittee shared after the fact. And again, like who is kind of providing this cohesion if the point is to have a lot of that discussion at subcommittee and then bringing back. I know it's really hard with a lot of players in the room too in a very short timeline, but I feel like having a lot of that clarity is really helpful to understand how to put together a plan going forward in particular. So that was it.
Thanks, Jen. Jim, can you speak to your comment in the chat? I'm not totally
Sure.
grasping.
We've been
Yeah.
involved in a lot of processes. I think a prime example is preservation of wetland function. And what we found through hard experience is that the concept of no net gain means guaranteed net loss. So if we take a preservationist perspective on our goals or the reason we're doing this, we're bound to fail. So we need to have a more aggressive approach that aims for net gain in forest function, including additional acreage being restored to forest canopy cover.
Thank you, Jim. So more of a content comment rather than a process comment.
True that. It's just if we start out with a roadmap that has certain foundational goals, we might end up with the wrong building.
Totally hear you. Thank you. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, just a couple of questions regarding, process clarity. I think it's good we're having this discussion about how do we get clear on the process. So just a couple specific questions about that. I think I heard Russ say that their subcommittee is looking at reaching out to the community to bring in perspective of small landowners and stuff. But then I heard that Triangle is also doing that same work. So is there a potential for conflict here? Should those efforts be coordinated somehow or another? That's the first question. The second question, I guess, is for Dave. And, if Dave is on track to actually be the drafter to put this all in one voice, how does he see getting information from the subcommittees if he's not attending those? How best would you like to get that, Dave? Are you looking for 1 or 2 paragraphs of us talking about changing harvest rotation, and then you take that and run with it? Or do you want us to actually draft a whole bunch of stuff about harvest rotation and give it to you to put in the plan?
Well, do you, maybe I can respond to your first point first, Carl. So in terms of the subcommittee discussions, I just want to reground us in reality and limitations, and that is Triangle has a limited budget. I would love to join every subcommittee meeting and participate and be involved in that, and it's just unfortunately not possible with the resources that we have. So we are doing our best to coordinate as much as possible and to stay in the loop. Chris is, doing an amazing job of gathering the subcommittees and keeping and, forming those and getting those launched and off the ground. And we are, coordinating via our internal project team meetings with Chris. We have been scoped to draft this plan with all of your input. And what that looks like, the proposal that we are putting forth is that we convene the task force at these meetings for full, big picture discussions like this. The subcommittees meet to advance specific sections of the plan. And then we work on incorporating all of your expertise and your insights into, as you said, Carl, one voice, which I think, in a process like this really requires having a small team of dedicated writers with review points, of course. So if there are, major concerns with that process that we can address within the limitations that we are working with, which again, is time and budget and everybody's, scheduled realities, as well as what, the code has laid forth as what is required, then I'm open to discussing them. But I just, I want everybody to know that we respect your time, we respect your expertise, and we are trying to put forth a process that works within our reality and those limitations. Yeah, Steve.
Just a quick question. Are you delegating the writing of any sections to task force members or to subcommittees? Or when you say, we're going to write this with your input, that is a very vague statement. What kind of input? I mean, so, draft paragraph, or, hey, I think you ought to talk about X, because those are two very different levels of input.
Yeah, so, I think if we share draft sections in writing and you all as a group review them and provide feedback on them, and that includes inserting, sections or segments and pieces in your writing, I think that's totally within the round, that still works flow wise. What we feel like would get really complicated is if there were entire sections, right, that certain individuals or groups of individuals were trying to write in their entirety.
So that's the back end. What's the front end? In other words, when you say with the input of subcommittees or task force members or whatever, input from this task force in some form or another, what's the front end? What do you get from us before you draft?
Well, that's the process that we're going through now, Steve. So we are doing the work now of making sure that we are in agreement and in alignment with some big picture aspects of this plan that are the building blocks of this plan. So this definition of forest resilience, that we are agreeing on, this big picture idea of what this task force is striving towards. These goals and objectives, these are the building blocks, the key aspects of the plan. And so when we are all working and having conversations about what those goals and strategies are, the subtext falls underneath that. And so this is where, this is the real building block work that we are engaging in, that you all had conversations in your subcommittees about. And so that's the information, that's the, I guess, as you called it, the front end, the initial work of hearing from you all to build those building blocks into
But how
the plan.
specific? In other words, it came up in the committee that Russ is, I won't say chairing, but he's actually chairing. Sorry, Russ. That fire, the fire adaptation and should be a major area, a major substantive area, which is important for the task of that committee, which is to coordinate between different landowners and different agencies that are concerned with forest. And so there will be something about fire resilience or fire adaptation. Okay, so that's a substantive thing. That's not at the level of basic principles, right, of resilience. Are members of the task force through the subcommittees or individually supposed to be making concrete recommendations about fire adaptation or not? That's just one example, but
I hear your example, and I think my hope is that we would eventually get there. Yes. But the idea is that we're working through this process of identifying goals, more big picture, right? And then working through objective setting and then strategies and actions. And so when you're actually, like you said, framing out specific actions, yes, that is the type of writing and contributions that we hope that this task force, we know that you all have excellent ideas and insight on and would actually draft out and frame.
okay,
Yeah.
that
So
helps a
yes, to
lot.
that
Yeah.
level of
Yeah, yeah,
specificity.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, just to follow up on this topic, to the extent that folks have the time and interest and inclination to do some writing, I would love if you as individuals or as a subcommittee wanted to send me X number of paragraphs, list of bullet statements, schedule a phone conversation, whatever, would be comfortable for you to communicate input to this plan. This is exactly what I've been doing for the last 20 years, doing these assessments around the West, is taking, rather diverse sources of information and combining it into a single document, trying to give it one voice if possible. So absolutely, just feel free to communicate. And even before you start writing, let's have a conversation about, are we all on the same page in terms of where we're going here? So it's all open. It's an evolving document as far as I'm concerned. And of course, even once we have a draft as such, there will be, I assume, multiple review stages as well.
It's sort of like Chairman Mao, from the masses to the masses. And the party actually does it. Sorry about that, but
Chris, do you have anything you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of us. I don't think I have anything constructive. I think, yeah, you, me, and Kate should probably debrief a little bit and just revisit how we're utilizing the subcommittees and just make sure we are crystal clear. A lot of good comments and points. And I think, yeah, the three of us can work together to try to pull together a coherent proposal for where folks can plug in and hopefully make it feel constructive and collaborative.
Can I make a comment too?
Good, Tracy.
Yeah, so I hear all these voices too, and I want to support all around. I have spent like the previous decade also doing science writing, sort of as Dave has done. I think one thing that might be really effective is, as opposed to giving Dave written paragraphs, which you offered up, Dave, but is to really give bulletized things from our subcommittees for him to craft into a single voice, in a way that and then we can revisit his writing and make sure that the semantics and the nuances are captured appropriately. But that might be the most succinct way for us to actually get that important information over to Dave, because I'm hearing this concern all around that this is just a tokenism, that our voices are token, and I don't feel that that's the intent at all. I think the intent is to actually have our expertise go into the original document, but the most effective way for Dave to parse that out is in bulletized lists as opposed to written paragraphs that he has to try and catch the meaning for. So that would be my suggestion from our subcommittees. It also seems like in the agenda or the outline as Dave has it, which is great as a starting point. I really am thankful for that. That seems like some subcommittees fit very tightly with a couple of those. So there's a stakeholder engagement one, for instance, and I think those subcommittees can really give a lot of valuable information to those parts of the table of content document. So anyway, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Tracy. I really, yeah, I appreciate that context and hearing about your experience. And yeah, it is our, you know, our task is to, um, you know, keep this moving and keep us on track and have this, you know, actually get pen to paper and get it drafted and feel cohesive and make sure that everybody, you know, that we are taking advantage of all of your expertise and experience and getting that in here. So we'll continue to, you know, to check in and make sure that it's feeling right and it's feeling good. And I appreciate all of the feedback and the opportunity to, yeah, to adapt. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I'm listening to this conversation and stuff, and the last meeting I was at, and I agree, that climate change and forest fires are a high priority in forest resilience. But the other big elephant I'm wondering about is recreational use. I haven't heard or seen any written or heard anything that addresses the impacts, the major impacts that recreational use has on both the natural resources and wildlife habitat, wildlife uh, uh, area. And I was just wondering, is recreation even considered a part of this discussion?
Hi, Frank. Yeah, recreation is certainly an aspect of this. And I think we flagged that right now, the way the subcommittees are set up is that seems to be a gap. And I'm not sure if that means we need to, if there's a subcommittee who feels like that is of interest to them and something they might add on to their scope, or if a new subcommittee might need to be established to cover that more specifically. And I think that could be tackled in subcommittee discussions. And if we need to form a new subcommittee, we could do that at our next meeting. Yeah, I think I saw, go ahead, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a critical aspect. I mean, if Whatcom County is serious on creating a resilient forest status, then they would have to consider recreational use, especially with the expected influx of population growth and the increase in the recreational use within Whatcom County area.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank. Steve and then Jen.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to second Frank's comments, but also it seems like again, the committee on coordination, the subcommittee on coordination is coordinating not just landowners, but other people who gain livelihood or other things from the forest. And so recreation might fit well into that coordination subcommittee because it's another interest to be coordinated with the others.
Thank you, Steve. Jen?
Yeah, thanks. Kind of goes back to my clarity. I'm not sure what the purpose of each subcommittee is. I don't know if that's out there somewhere so you can get kind of a definition. I think there's a lot of broad words in the title of the subcommittees that have a lot of overlap, but I'm not really sure what's the purpose of each one, which will also help me because I need to join one. So maybe that's just via email, we can chat on that front. But then I think it again kind of goes back to those goals of who kind of wrote those, what are the purposes? Because I see in the goals, there's talk about forest fires and dealing with them after the fact for community involvement, but not for proactive how to prevent forest fires and fire management, which recreation would play a big role in for escaped campfires.
Thanks, Jen. So related to the subcommittees, the 3 out of 4 subcommittees have met and have started working on their purpose statements. As part of our follow-up from this meeting, we can share those purpose statements for those that have them and provide a little bit more information so that you can determine which subcommittee or subcommittees, you're not limited to just one, that you'd be interested in joining. And related to that point, the discussion of goals. So after our first meeting, all the task force members shared some draft goal statements that we Triangle worked on reframing and kind of merging together like with like, and those were then parsed out by subject area and framed for further discussion via these subcommittees. So that's the goal statements came from everybody here, all of the task force members, and are now being discussed and refined via subcommittee meeting discussions. Does that answer the goal question?
Yeah, that helps, at least first of all, and then secondary is who, like what's the review after that of deciding, are those enough? Do we need additional committees, like goals, et cetera? What's the like final piece of that?
Yeah, so once the subcommittees have landed on their goal statements for each subject area, we'll then have a group discussion via these full group task force meetings, so that, you know, the everyone is being exposed to the discussions and ideas from all of the subcommittees. Yeah, Brandy.
Great, thank you for that. Regarding the goal statements, I would appreciate it if you guys would send out the original compiled goal statement list so that everybody has all of the original goal statements, so that we can make some decisions about whether or not there are gaps or gaps, or even things aren't being reflected in your interpretation and your synthesis of the goal statements that you've loaded into the workbooks that you've shared out with us.
No problem, Brandy. We can do that. It's 12:15 and I want to make sure that we have time for public comment. So I'm going to propose that we move our discussion of forest resilience to our next meeting. Chris, does that work for you?
Yeah, I think so. The only thing to note is that there is a draft definition of forest resilience. I think I forgot about that earlier, Frank, when you asked. In the packet, I forget which page it is. It's like page 5. The draft definition, and my brain is escaping me of even where that draft definition came from. But everyone take a look. So that's essentially your homework, is to chew on that. If you have suggested edits, come prepared at the next meeting to discuss in more detail. But I agree, let's move on to public comment period.
Chris, just a further clarification. This came from draft definition statements that all of the task force members shared. So this is incorporating language from task force members.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's my Monday brain. So public comment, I can't see any members of the public online. So Kate or Melanie, you see anyone raise your hand remotely, please let me know. We do have one member of the public in the room. Kaya?
Hi there. Yeah, I'd love to give comment if there's time for that.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to be a little closer to the mic, but yeah, go ahead.
It's like maybe Alan's got a hand up as well. Can folks hear me all right on Zoom?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Hi there. I'm Kai Hayes. I'm the Land and Water Policy Manager for Resources. We're a Whatcom-based environmental education and advocacy nonprofit, and we engage in forest issues where they intersect with facets of climate resilience and watershed health mainly. We envision a future in which forest ecosystems are restored to support climate resilient communities, thriving fish and wildlife populations, and a sustainable forestry economy. And so we really value the conversations and insights that the task force is assembling to be able to further those goals, and really appreciate all of the contributions that each of you are bringing to this really important space. I just wanted to maybe take a minute to touch on what Barry Wenger brought up earlier in the meeting, since it seems like we may not have time for task force members to have further conversation around that. But I met with Executive Sidhu last week and touched on the Little Lily timber sale and the public attention that was mentioned, that the sale has gotten as one of the last remaining larger contiguous patches of mature forest in Whatcom County. If you look on the watershed viewer, actually at the tree height LiDAR layer, the other really significant patch is largely contained in the Bessie timber sale, which was recently protected through the CCA, the second round of CCA allocations. And Executive Sidhu mentioned that he had not yet heard anything from the Forest Resilience Task Force on the Little Lily sale. And of course, the first thing that I brought up and highlighted was how recently the task force has convened and expressed some concern that the timeline of the sale really didn't allow the task force a realistic amount of time to provide meaningful comment on the sale itself. That being said, I think it would be a real loss to omit the very perspectives and expertise that the task force was sort of intended to provide to processes like this one. I wanted to share that we saw almost 1,000 comment letters submitted to DNR's SEPA Center in early August. Folks identified specific concerns about 2 of the oldest units in the sale, but they also generally expressed concerns about the potential loss of a stand that's a prime candidate for other management strategies due to the sale being finalized before both the state level Carbon and Forest Management Work Group and the county level Forest Resilience Task Force, before those 2 groups could conclude their recommendations related to ideal management strategies for forests like this one. And so a high level ask that these folks included in the majority of these comment letters was also that the DNR consider temporarily pausing timber sales that include mature forest within Whatcom County to allow for the DNR's work group and for Whatcom County's task force to complete their work and recommendations around the same time, end of 2025. We see this ask as an opportunity to move beyond that sale by sale mentality that has left everyone, advocates, agencies, and stakeholders feeling pretty burnt out and eager to create space for more informed, deliberate planning and conversations, and really get at the heart of how to best use the tools in the toolkit that we have available for forest management. We think these conversations are crucial to generating a shared vision that builds trust in stakeholders, agencies, and partners, and creates a clear path forward for all in terms of how we are each best planning and allocating our resources. It also ensures that the time and resources invested by the task force participants are respected and that the committee members are able to maximize the returns of their contributions to the process. Several council members at the county level have shown support for the idea of creating extra time and space for these higher level conversations to develop, and they expressed a desire to see leadership from the executive's office in this, in line with the original letter sent by Executive Sidhu's office in July, expressing a desire to collaborate more closely with DNR and management planning. So I just wanted to reiterate that I think there's a lot of value in discussing further what Barry brought up earlier. And I wanted to encourage the Forest Resilience Task Force to consider asking the county to request that pause on timber sales containing mature forest until your recommendations have been finalized as a first step in that unifying path forward, one that recognizes the value in retaining the widest selection of tools in the toolkit available. I also will be sharing an example of what other counties like Jefferson County have been doing in tandem with the DNR, including creating detailed plans that name DNR parcels and ascribe desired management prescriptions for the area. And these include trust land transfer and CCA funded conservation strategies in addition to harvest prescriptions. I think it's very reasonable for Whatcom County to follow suit and to request the time and space necessary to prepare a thoughtful resilience plan that addresses these matters without having to be concerned about unanticipated losses in the meantime. Thanks very much for considering my comments. And again, just to all of you for being here in your various capacities to contribute to such an important space.
Yeah. Corey, you got a comment?
I think Kaylee was first.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing another hand up. Go.
I think Kaylee has a comment, maybe a separate public comment.
There you go. Go ahead, Kaylee. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
It's all right. I was just going to say hello. thank everyone for their time and willingness to contribute to this super important issue in our county, and for your continued patience. I truly believe this is uncharted territory, not just for our county, but I think our county is really becoming a leader in the state and having these conversations. And so I just feel so assured at the all-star team that are on this task force, and definitely eager to continue to learn from all of you and to see the culmination of this task force work result in something that county council can move forward in pursuing policy and budget priorities, not only here locally, but also in that work with our state, federal, and tribal partners. So again, just want to thank you for your time and commitment to this work. And as always, feel free to reach out if I can ever be of service. Thanks.
It's good. We'll go Corey and then we'll go Alan.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could limit like public comment like to like a certain period of time. Like I'm looking at how much time we have in this meeting, and it seems like, you know, to have a long 5-minute comment about a specific thing when we haven't even had a chance for the task force to come together on how we're going to string our goals together. I mean, it just seems like the comment that we just received would be much more appropriate for maybe a county council meeting or a different meeting. So I'm just wondering if we could put some thought toward that, because it just seems inappropriate to spend 5 to 10 minutes of our short time that we have on such a specific comment. And I don't really feel like the task force has come together at this time enough. And I question whether that's the intent of this task force at all, to be coming out with a specific opinion on a particular thing like a timber sale like that. I would ask if there's been any comment from the Forest Advisory Committee as well. But it just seems like we really need to be careful with this, because this could be just another meeting where we spend the whole time on public comment. Thank you.
Sorry. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, just a brief comment. Appreciate the ability to view these proceedings. I am very interested in process of reconciling the different aspects of goals and how they be reconciled between the different groups supporting them. And again, I wish you well in your endeavors.
Sound right. Not seeing any other hands. I'm going to close public comment and move us into the wrap up and next steps. We have that
Sorry,
one.
Chris, there's one more, Brell.
Oh, it's not showing up on my screen. Go ahead, bro. Let's we are pretty close to time, so the more succinct the better.
Hi there, Brell Frobe. I live in Bellingham, but grew up on the Middle Fork Nooksack watershed. I will keep it very, very brief. And thank you for the opportunity to comment, and very appreciative of this task force and the work that y'all are attempting to do. I think, Corey, you make a really good point about it. Just seems like it'd be really premature to be asking the task force to take a stance or provide insight on a particular timber sale. And I think one thing that I heard from Kaya's comment just now is that perhaps that might be a really good thing to express to the executive, that it's just like, you know, it's not the right time and to be doing that, since the task force is just forming and creating goals and such. And perhaps, you know, I think the suggestion that Kaya brought up around asking for a pause of mature forest sales while the task force can do this important work could be a helpful ask. If members of the task force want to reach out to Satpal, that could be really helpful. And one last quick thing, I know a big concern about pausing or canceling these timber sales is the economic impacts on beneficiaries. And just want to name that on the state level, there's this forest and carbon management, carbon and forest management work group that's also looking at the issue of mature forest conservation, and they're also looking at the economic impacts on a statewide level. So I think there'll be a lot of really useful information coming out of that working group that perhaps will be relevant and useful for this task force. So just wanted to flag that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, bro. All right, with that, moving us on to our last agenda item with 0 minutes to spare. Melanie, take it
Yeah,
away.
I'll keep it really quick. I'll just remind everybody that we're deviating from our Monday schedule due to the holiday. So our next meeting is on October 10th, which is a Thursday. And then in the meantime, we will be sharing some additional documents as requested. Brandy, some of those additional draft statements, as well as guidance for the next subcommittee meetings, which Chris and the Triangle team will discuss further. So thank you all for the time. Barry, a quick final word.
Yeah, just on the issue that Corey and Brell were talking about, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, because if we have an old growth forest, I mean, typically a real old growth forest is being burnt down or being attacked. There's no time to wait for a plan to come out and deal with the forest fire issue on that. So I think these emerging issues, and I put a chat for everyone to look at, are something that need to be brought to our attention. And I think we should also be maybe using them as like a kind of a test case, an example. What take a quick look at them, get the information we can, and say, okay, is this something that's really that unusual, or is it just doing business as usual? To me, is not that we're going to get us anywhere. Like, we're going to keep losing all our resources. Wildlife is what I'm really interested in, but fish, salmon, everything. And these wildlife corridors are really critical. So I don't think these timber sales are looking at wildlife corridors or anything else like that.
Then you should be the HCP, because this is not business as usual. And what is business
I'm quite
as
familiar
usual,
with the whole process, Corey.
I don't think you are, because you wouldn't be saying that.
No,
So if you want to talk
I worked
offline,
for.
but I just don't think it's appropriate to
Okay,
take
we
the
disagree.
entire task
I'm
force.
speaking and I'd like to have the floor. So look at my chat. I suggest we use that as a test case. This has been done in many different ways, on different types of projects. In the 50 years I've been doing land use planning for the state and in private. So I think we shouldn't just pass this kind of stuff over.
I think this sounds like a conversation for offline, and just noting that we're at time, and I appreciate everyone's comments and interests and passion on the subject. I think this is a conversation to continue offline. Chris, any final words?
So many, but Jim, I'll give you one quick.
Just quickly, if we want to have discussion offline, I wonder if we could have a roster of the members with contact information.
Seems totally reasonable. I'll make sure we get that out. Appreciate everyone taking the time today. A lot more to talk about, and we'll pick this up next month and at our subcommittee meetings in the interim. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all.